fan of Cuomo and the shutdown in New York. You've lauded New York for their policy. New York had the highest death rate in the world. How could we possibly be jumping up and down and saying, oh, Governor Cuomo did a great job? He had the worst death rate in the world.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repetitively in the past. They got hit very badly. They've made some mistakes. Right now, if you look at what's going on right now, the things that are going on in New York to get their test positivity 1% or less is because they are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've developed enough community immunity that they're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York, it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
There's also the...
That was Dr. Anthony Fauci absolutely slamming Senator Rand Paul. And it's interesting because Fauci so rarely loses his cool, loses patience. But there, the lies and the misinformation by Rand Paul was too much, even for the traditionally very, very patient Dr. Fauci. He basically says, look, Rand Paul has a pattern of misconstruing and of misinforming the public and in trying to twist the data to serve his own narratives, and that puts the public at risk, and he's right. So the first thing there is that Rand Paul is trying to justify an anti-lockdown policy by pointing to New York and saying they are among the worst hit and they had a strict lockdown. Doesn't that prove the lockdown didn't work? And Fauci is 100% right to scoff at that and say, look, they were unfortunate because they got hit first. And in this crisis, timing and luck mattered a lot at the first stages. Even here in Canada, Quebec got hit harder because they had an earlier March break and everyone traveled and then they came back. And so the places that were hit early, even if they did things right, often struggled. They often struggled to deal with it. And New York is one of those examples. And they did their best afterwards. I've been critical of Cuomo. His cuts to local health care, his failures in certain regards are inexcusable. And he should not be praised. But he was unlucky relative to a lot of other large state governors. But people in Texas, people in Florida, they saw what happened in New York and they had time to adjust, to enforce social distancing, to do all of those things. And they didn't, and people lost their lives. And so I would suggest that states like Florida and Texas, which are largely Republican governed, failed much worse than New York because they had the luxury of time and they had the luxury of a case study, and they ignored it. And I think that's crucial to note. It doesn't disprove anything about a lockdown. And Fauci is also right to criticize the basic lie from Rand Paul, saying that New York doesn't need a shutdown anymore, or the shutdown didn't work. It's because they've built some sort of herd immunity. And that's just not true either. Fauci notes about a fifth to a quarter, 22% of people maybe have the antibodies. 22% is not herd immunity. No immunologist, no doctor, no person with a professional medical or science background would suggest that. And Fauci and Rand Paul are both of that broad field. They're both supposedly men of science, men who understand medicine and human bodies and things like that. And Rand Paul is basically lying to Fauci. He's lying to the American people. This is so fascinating to me because Fauci, even with all of Trump's lies and misinformation, you don't really see him lose his cool like this. There's something so brazen about a medical doctor like Rand Paul basically making excuses for a plan that has cost 200,000 people their lives and just brazenly doing it because it serves his ideological and his political and likely his financial interests. Dr. Fauci had no time for it, and I don't think the American people should either. Rand Paul is among the worst senators in the Senate, and he should be defeated in a couple years' time when his time for re-election comes up.